Hi, I'm Coraline. And I guess my biggest mistake was thinking birthdays meant something. That night, my sister threw my cake on the floor and screamed, "Dog, get down and eat it." And my parents clapped. They actually clapped. I didn't cry. I just stood there, frozen. Hours later, they texted me, "We've cut ties. Never come back." But when I replied, "Pay your own $87,000 in debt," they called me over 200 times. So here's my question. When does a family stop being a family and start becoming a crime scene? It was early evening when I pulled into my parents' driveway in Portland. The sky had that dull orange haze that always seemed to hang over the suburbs, pretty from a distance, but suffocating up close. Their house looked exactly the same as it had for the last decade. Trimmed hedges, porch lights too bright, the smell of roast meat leaking out through the front door. I sat in the car for a while, both hands still on the steering wheel, pretending to scroll through my phone. Really, I was stalling. I'd been gone for years. I told myself tonight would be different. Maybe this time they'd see me. Not the version of me they'd built from jokes and comparisons. I'd baked a small cake, nothing fancy, just lemon and vanilla, the way Mom used to make when I was little. I thought it might mean something. A peace offering, maybe. When I finally stepped inside, Tamsin was the first to greet me. My older sister looked exactly as she did on social media. Perfect hair, expensive dress, that smile sharp enough to slice through glass. "Well," she said, looking at the cake box in my hands, "still baking your own cakes? Guess some things never change." I laughed softly, like it didn't sting. "Yeah, guess not." Mom swooped in with her perfume cloud and a stiff hug. Dad patted my shoulder like I was a coworker. They guided me toward the dining table, already set for 6, though only 4 chairs were filled. The candles flickered against the silverware. Everything felt staged, like we were part of some performance. Dinner was quiet in the loudest way. Everyone talked, but not with me. Conversations overlapped about Tamsin's new job, her husband's promotion, the new vacation home in Bend. I nodded, smiled at the right times, tried not to look at the empty chair across from me. At one point, Dad looked up and said, "You still working from home, sweetheart?" "Yeah," I said. "I manage digital campaigns now, mostly freelance." "That's nice," Mom said quickly, before turning to Tamsin. "Your sister always had such creative hobbies, didn't she?" Hobbies. That word burned. Dinner ended. The table was cleared. I stood to help, but Mom waved me off. "You're our guest tonight." The word guest didn't feel kind. Then Tamsin clapped her hands together. "Okay, everyone, time for the family gift." I froze. Family gift? No one had mentioned that before. The lights dimmed, someone turned on their phone flashlight, and laughter filled the room. I watched as Tamsin carried out my cake, the one I'd baked, the one I'd set carefully in the kitchen earlier. She placed it on the table like she was setting up a magic trick. "Wow," she said theatrically. "Such a masterpiece, Coraline. Did you really make this all by yourself?" I smiled awkwardly. "Yeah, thought it'd be..." Before I could finish, she lifted the cake from the stand, grinning wide. Then, in one motion, she dropped it straight to the floor. "Dog," she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. "Get down and eat it off the ground." The room erupted. My parents laughed first, loud, full-bodied laughter that made my stomach twist. Mom actually clapped her hands. Dad leaned back in his chair, chuckling so hard his face turned red. Even my uncle, sitting in the corner, snorted into his drink. I didn't move. My hands were shaking, but I pressed them flat against my sides. Someone said, "Oh, come on, it's just a joke." Another voice added, "Don't be so sensitive, Coraline. You always take things too seriously." The smell of lemon frosting hit me. The cake was splattered across the tile, candles still flickering sideways. My knees bent before I even realized it, and I reached for the small silver plate that had fallen next to it, a plate I'd brought from my own kitchen. It was the only thing that hadn't broken. I held it for a second, feeling its cool weight in my palm. Nobody helped. Nobody said sorry. They just kept laughing. I stood up slowly. "Excuse me," I murmured. In the bathroom, I turned on the faucet and let the cold water run over my hands. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like me. My face pale, lips pressed tight, eyes empty. I heard them through the door, still talking, still laughing. "That's the big gift the whole family prepared for her," Mom said between chuckles. The words hit like a slap. I smiled anyway, because that's what I'd always done. My hands trembled, but I kept them under the running water until they steadied. If I cry now, they'll say I ruined the night. If I stay quiet, they'll say I can't take a joke. So I walked back out, smiled, and thanked them for dinner. Nobody looked twice when I slipped my shoes on. By the time I stepped outside, the air had cooled, and the street was dark except for the yellow glow from their windows. I drove home with the radio off. The silence filled every corner of the car. When I got to my apartment, I sat at the kitchen table and typed a text. "Thanks for tonight." No reply. Hours passed. I took a shower, changed into an old sweater, made tea I didn't drink. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. Mom's name on the screen. The message was short. "We've cut all ties with you. Get out and never come back." I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I typed, slowly, deliberately, "The $87,000 in loans and payments. Pay them yourselves." I set the phone down, face first. It buzzed again, once, twice. Then it didn't stop. 50 calls, 80, 120, 203. Each vibration felt like a heartbeat against the table. I didn't pick up. Outside, the city was quiet. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left in the room. I picked up the silver plate, wiped a bit of frosting from its edge, and placed it on the counter. It gleamed under the dim light, small, unbroken, mine. As the calls kept coming, I realized silence could be louder than any scream. The morning light slipped through the blinds in thin lines, cutting across the floor like quiet accusations. Rain must have come and gone during the night, because the pavement outside looked washed, fresh in a way that felt dishonest. I hadn't slept much. I don't remember dreaming. Just the constant buzz of my phone on the kitchen counter vibrating against the laminate until it felt like part of the apartment's foundation. I walked into the kitchen barefoot. The cold floor shocked me more than the daylight. My phone was still face down where I'd left it, but it hadn't stopped blinking. I flipped it over. Unknown numbers, dozens of them. "Ungrateful. You embarrassed your parents. They gave you everything. This is how you repay them?" Each message hit like a shove to the chest. I didn't respond. I didn't delete them. I just let the screen go black again. I set the phone next to the silver plate still sitting on the counter, clean now, but I could still see frosting in the tiny ridges around its edge. I opened Instagram. Tamsin had posted a photo. It was from last night, the family at the table. Everyone smiling, wine glasses raised, candles glowing warm. But something was off. I zoomed in. My seat was cropped out. I wasn't in the picture. The caption read, "Family means forgiving, even when it's hard." The comments flooded in. "So beautiful. Such a strong family. Sending love. Some people don't deserve you." Some people. That was me now. I locked the screen, set the phone back down. They didn't just delete my name. They deleted my version of the story. I stood there a while, staring out at the empty street. For a second, I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was too absurd to cry over. Then I grabbed my coat, packed my laptop bag, and headed to work like it was any other Monday. Traffic was light. The rain had cleaned out the usual mess. At the office, everything looked normal. Cubicles, fluorescent lights, the smell of burned coffee. The receptionist waved. I nodded. At my desk, Martha beat me there. She was sipping her tea like always, her sweater hanging off one shoulder, eyes watching me like a hawk pretending to be a pigeon. "You okay?" she asked. "Just tired." I sat down, powered up my screen. "Long weekend." She tilted her head. "You look pale. You sick?" "No." I opened my inbox. "Just didn't sleep well." There was a vase of flowers on my desk. I hadn't seen it when I walked in. Roses, too red, too perfect. A card tucked between the stems read, "From your family, forgiveness starts with you." I didn't touch the vase. I didn't even flinch. I got up, walked the flowers straight to the break room, and dropped them into the trash next to someone's half-eaten sandwich. I came back to my desk and sat down like nothing happened. But I kept the card. Not because it meant anything, but because it might. Later. They wanted me to feel guilty for bleeding. Like the bruise was my fault. I spent the rest of the day doing expense reports and tax prep for clients who never remembered my name. Numbers made sense. They didn't lie. They didn't laugh in your face and call it love. Around 4:30, I took a break, stepped outside, and sat in my car. The clouds hung low and heavy. Rain tapped gently against the windshield, rhythmic and unbothered. I unlocked my phone again, opened my banking app, and that's when I saw it. Auto payments. Not just one, not just two, but line after line. Monthly withdrawals, late fees, lump sums tied to accounts I never used. A total of $87,000. I scrolled faster. Credit cards, property taxes, something labeled family trust loan. All linked to my name, Flash. I was 25, sitting across from Dad in the living room. He'd said, "You're good with money, Coraline. Just put your name down. Don't worry, we'll handle the payments." I'd said yes. Of course I did. Because back then, I still thought trust was something you could give without a receipt. Back then, I thought love meant sacrifice. Now, the family trust was just my debt in disguise. They didn't just humiliate me, they used me as the safety net they planned to cut loose. I turned off the engine and sat there a long while. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just felt something shift. Not like a snap, more like ice cracking. "All my life," I whispered to the windshield. I thought silence kept the peace, but silence just built their confidence. I reached into my bag, pulled out an old notepad. I flipped past grocery lists and scribbled passwords until I found a blank page. At the top, I wrote, $87,000. Track every cent. Then I underlined it. They taught me not to speak, but they never said I couldn't write. I thought keeping records was my job. I didn't realize it would save my life. I wasn't thinking about being clever when I wrote that line. It just came out. But now, sitting in my living room, I stared at those words like they held weight for the first time. It was late again, the kind of quiet that only shows up after rain and regret. My apartment still smelled faintly of dish soap and old coffee. The silver plate from my birthday sat on the coffee table beside a stack of folders I hadn't touched in years. I opened my laptop. It wheezed to life like it was just as tired as I was. I waded through the hum and flicker, and then I started digging. I pulled out everything: old statements, scanned PDFs, flagged emails. Some dated back to 2015. My hands were steady, but my heart kept kicking in my chest. I laid sticky notes across the table, blue for credit cards, yellow for loans, pink for anything tied to my name. Within an hour, a messy rainbow of responsibility stared back at me. Mom and Dad's mortgage, Tamsin's wedding photographer, a Dodge SUV I'd never driven. Their debts lived under my name like squatters who'd copied the keys and changed the locks. Then I saw it, a digital file labeled Refinance 2018. I clicked it open. It was a form I didn't remember, but it had my name, my info, and a signature that was trying too hard to look like mine. Too round, too careful. And they misspelled my middle name. My mother would never do that. But Tamsin? She always thought I spelled it with 2 N's. They didn't even bother to check, I muttered. I sat back in my chair, blinking at the ceiling. Memory started sliding in. I was 24, fresh out of college. Dad had said, "You're the responsible one, Coraline. Just put your name down. It's a formality." He was pouring coffee. Mom was nodding like it was already done. I'd believed them. But it wasn't a formality. It was the first brick in a house of debt they built without me, but left in my name. The kettle screamed. I hadn't even realized I'd turned it on. I poured the hot water, steeped some tea I wouldn't drink, and dialed my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hi, honey. Did you know my name is on your mortgage, your car, and Tamsin's wedding balance?" A beat of silence. Then, "Don't start drama, Coraline. We trusted you." "No, you counted on me not asking questions." Her voice dropped, sweet and stern. "You owe us. After everything we've done for you." I hung up. That was new. I never did that before. I opened my notebook, wrote, "Step 1, cut the conversation, not the truth." The phone buzzed again. Tamsin, her 204th call. I let it ring once, then answered. "You're overreacting," she said, like she was scolding a child. "Forging my signature isn't overreacting. It's criminal. You always take things so seriously. You should be grateful we included you." I hit record, didn't say a word. "You think this makes you look good? You're making things worse. Grow up, Coraline." Her voice was smug, like she still thought I was 12. I let her finish, then hung up without a word. I looked at the silver plate again. I picked it up, placed it gently on top of my folder stack. A lid, a seal. For years, I'd cleaned their messes. Now I was sealing the truth. I opened my email and sent every document to myself. Subject, evidence. Then I set a reminder on my phone. Lawyer. Friday, 9 a.m. By Friday morning, I wasn't just the quiet one anymore. I was the only one holding proof. The city moved quickly that day. Portland had that crisp October bite in the air, the kind that wakes up your skin before your thoughts. I walked through downtown like I had somewhere important to be, which, for once, I did. Not for anyone else, just me. I held the folder close, rubber-banded and tight. Tucked inside my tote bag, resting softly against the inside pocket, was the silver plate. I didn't bring it as evidence. I brought it like armor. Leland Cooper's office wasn't fancy. The building looked older than both of us, with a buzzer that barely worked and a door that squeaked like it didn't want to open. His receptionist offered me water, which I declined, and pointed to a chair that sagged a little when I sat down. It was perfect, honest, in a way my family hadn't been for years. He stepped out 5 minutes later, mid-50s, gray streaks in his hair, leather briefcase under his arm, eyes sharp but not cold. He smiled, but not too much. "You must be Coraline. Come on in." We didn't shake hands. I appreciated that. Inside his office, the desk was worn, stacked, but not cluttered. Books lined the back wall, titles about contracts, fraud, elder law. I placed the folder down without a word. He nodded once, opened it, and started reading. The silence stretched, but it didn't feel awkward, just focused. I watched his eyes move across signatures, dates, copies of my ID, next to forged names, credit reports that read like someone else's life. He took his time. I needed him to. After about 10 minutes, he closed the folder slowly, then leaned back in his chair. "These signatures," he began, looking me in the eye, "they're not yours. That right?" I nodded. "No, not one of them." He exhaled through his nose, firm and measured. Then your sister committed fraud, possibly identity theft, depending on how those documents were used. My fingers tightened around the edge of my seat. It wasn't fear exactly, it was something more complicated, like validation dressed in anxiety. Like someone had finally turned on the light in a room I thought I imagined. For years, I said quietly, I thought I was just unlucky. Turns out I was robbed. He gave a half nod. That's how it starts, especially when it's family. They count on you to call it a mistake, not a crime. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Look, he continued, tapping the folder. This isn't going to be easy. If you decide to move forward, legally, it'll fracture the family. Are you ready for that? I thought of the cake on the floor. My name scrubbed out of photos. The message from my father telling me to get out and never come back. They already did the breaking, I said. I'm just picking up the pieces they left behind. He studied me for a beat longer, then nodded again. All right, let's build your timeline, but listen carefully. Once people like this feel cornered, they come after your credibility. They'll play the sympathy card, twist your words, make it sound like you're the unstable one. They've already practiced that, I said. By the time I left the office, it was past noon. The sky had cleared, but the air felt heavier than when I'd walked in. I stopped at a bench near Pioneer Courthouse Square, opened my phone, and saw the missed call. Unknown number, voicemail. I listened with one earbud, thumb frozen above the screen. Drop this, Coraline. You'll regret it. The voice was unmistakable. My father, but colder, measured. Like he was reading from a page. No emotion, just threat. Funny, I whispered. You used to call me for help. Now it's warnings. Not 2 minutes later, a new email buzzed through. Subject, HR inquiry, urgent. The message was vague but clear enough. Concerns have been raised about misuse of company time and resources during work hours. No signature, no name. But the tone? Polished, rehearsed, weaponized. It had Tamsin's fingerprints all over it. This wasn't about family anymore. This was about power. I spent the rest of the day in quiet motion. No music, no distractions, just structure. I took the folders I'd scattered across the apartment and created something close to order. Subfolders for financial records, scanned documents, call logs, timestamps, color-coded, labeled, safe. At some point, I stopped and looked at the silver plate. It was catching light from the lamp. I reached over, touched it with the tip of one finger. The coolness surprised me. It hadn't held warmth since that night. I remembered being 12, sitting at the kitchen table with Dad. He was teaching me how to balance a checkbook, telling me, always have a plan, Coraline. Money's not just money, it's how the world measures respect. I used to believe him, but respect wasn't what they gave me, it was what I had to reclaim. I opened my laptop again. My finger hovered over a folder labeled Family. I hesitated for half a breath, then renamed it Evidence. Before bed, I drafted a letter to Tamsin. You once said family is forever. I agree. The truth will make sure of that. I slid the silver plate into the folder, not as a keepsake, but a reminder of how small things can carry heavy truths. Then I exhaled, not in fear, in readiness. I won't let them define my silence anymore. The next Monday morning came colder than expected. I left early, earlier than I needed to. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, more like waiting for a punch that hadn't landed yet. I took the back stairwell up to the 4th floor. It smelled like cleaning fluid and tired carpets. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something was off. Conversations hushed the second I pushed the glass door open. Someone at the printer looked down too fast. 2 coworkers who usually greeted me with a half smile now looked past me like I wasn't there. Then, in the break room, I walked in mid-conversation, and both voices stopped. One woman stared at the coffee pot, the other fumbled with her phone like she'd suddenly forgotten how it worked. I didn't ask. I just poured my coffee. It wasn't until I checked my email that the pieces clicked. A post was making the rounds, cropped screenshots of text messages, out of context, of course, paired with vague captions about entitlement and cutting off toxic family. My sister's words, curated and styled for sympathy. There was even one of me, just my hands, holding that cake right before she dropped it. The caption read, "Sometimes you gotta let things go, even if they still think it's love." It was clever, cold, and people were eating it up. By mid-morning, my supervisor, Jonah, tapped gently on my office door. "Hey, Coraline, can we talk for a sec?" I followed him down the hall into a small conference room. He sat across from me, nervously fiddling with a pen. "Listen," he began. "I know things are probably tough right now, personally, but some of our clients follow our social pages, and there's been chatter." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "They're concerned about your personal drama," I said for him, trying to keep my tone even. He gave me a look of apology, not for what he was saying, but for having to be the one saying it. "I'm just the messenger, Coraline." I nodded once. No fight, no emotion. "It's amazing," I said quietly, "how fast people believe a lie when it's wrapped in laughter." He didn't respond, just handed me a printed memo and left the room. By noon, I was sitting across from HR. The fluorescent lights above buzzed like a dull headache. The head of HR, Diane, laid a sheet of paper in front of me. A written warning, unprofessional behavior, potential risk to company image. The complaint had come in over the weekend. Anonymously, of course. It referenced allegations of fraud. Same ones I was investigating, same forged documents now being used against me. I didn't raise my voice, didn't cry, just looked Diane straight in the eyes. "I'd like a copy of the complaint." Her expression stiffened. "I'll need to check if you're authorized to access that." I leaned forward slightly. "It's my name on the paper. That should be authorization enough." There was a long pause. "I'll follow up," she said finally. The moment didn't feel like a win, exactly. But it didn't feel like surrender either. Later, during lunch, I didn't eat. I just sat in my car, staring at my own reflection in the windshield. The same dull gaze from that night with the cake. The same hollow pause in my throat. And then, without meaning to, a memory came back. I must have been 7, maybe 8. My mother scolding me after a disagreement with Tamsin. "Why can't you just let things go, Coraline?" she'd said. I remember standing there, tiny fists clenched, and replying with a voice much smaller than I felt. "Because they're not gone for me." Even now, the echo still rang loud. I gripped the steering wheel and whispered, "They want me quiet again. That's how they win." A light tap on the passenger side window made me flinch. It was Martha. Soft-spoken, keeps to herself Martha. She held a plain manila envelope in her hand and passed it through the window without a word. "They printed it to the wrong tray," she said. "I didn't see anything, but if I had, I'd say this wasn't right." Inside were copies of the complaint. The sender's email was masked, but the IP trace, highlighted in yellow, was tied to Tamsin's company domain. Of course it was her. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just exhaled, long and slow. "She's not done performing," I muttered. Martha gave me a nod. The kind of nod you give someone standing on the edge of a storm, but still holding an umbrella. "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than she probably knew. That night, at home, I sat at my dining table with everything spread out in front of me. Folders, emails, screenshots, documents. I opened my notebook and wrote a single line at the top of a new page. I've been cornered before. This time, I brought a map. I picked up the phone and called Leland. "They've escalated it," I said. "They're coming for my job now." His voice stayed even, grounding. "Then we'll respond in writing, carefully, thoroughly." "No," I said, steady. "This time I'll respond in person." I spent the next 2 hours drafting a letter to the board. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't defensive, just facts, bullet points, dates, attachments, a summary of how my name had been used, forged, exploited, and now weaponized against me in a smear campaign to silence what they thought I wouldn't say out loud. When I was done, I slid the letter into a large envelope. On instinct, I placed the silver plate beside it on the table. It didn't need to go in the envelope. It didn't need to be explained. It just needed to be there. "They turned my silence into entertainment," I said aloud, voice low, calm. "Now I'll turn their laughter into evidence." The next morning, I handed the letter to HR myself and smiled when they read who it was addressed to. The hallway outside the conference room was cold, like someone had left a window cracked just enough to let suspicion in. I walked slowly, heels tapping with the kind of rhythm that wasn't asking for attention, but refusing to apologize either. Inside, 12 people sat around the glossy table. The frosted glass walls gave us all the illusion of privacy, while still letting shadows flicker just outside. HR reps, 2 managers, a director I'd only seen during quarterly meetings. Tamsin sat confidently near the end, legs crossed, pen in hand, perfectly coiffed. She smiled like this was another performance, and in many ways, it was. I took the last empty seat, my folder in front of me, the silver plate tucked carefully in my tote. "Let's begin," my HR manager said, glancing nervously at the paper in his hand. He hadn't read it beforehand. I'd asked him not to. He cleared his throat and began reading. "At this time, I am formally requesting internal investigation into repeated acts of defamation, financial fraud, and identity misuse connected to my employment and personal records. All evidence of these actions, including forged documents and malicious email correspondence, point directly to Ms. Tamsin Haller, my sister." The room froze. I could hear someone's pen drop. Tamsin tilted her head and laughed softly. "This is absurd. She's unstable." "You'll want to let him finish," I said calmly. "The attachments speak louder than I ever did." He kept reading. His voice grew flatter, more mechanical, as he reached the end, like he'd decided to remove himself from the weight of the words. When he stopped, I slid the flash drive across the table. "Everything is time-stamped. Emails, financial records, even a voicemail you might recognize." Tamsin didn't look at me. She crossed her arms and looked at the screen as the email opened, a message from her to our father. "She'll never fight back. She's too scared of losing face." I turned toward her. "You were half right." The silence was a thick blanket. Someone across the table whispered, "This could be criminal." Then came the storm. Tamsin pushed her chair back. "You've been planning this for years." "No, you've been writing it for years. I just finally read it out loud." That's when the door slammed open. My father stepped in like a man arriving at his own funeral, late, bitter, and uninvited. "You're destroying the family for what? Pride?" I met his eyes. I remembered him teaching me to balance a checkbook, to pack my lunch so neatly it made the cafeteria ladies smile. I remembered every version of him, but not this one. "You destroyed it when you taught me silence was love," I said, steady as stone. His face changed then, not angry, not ashamed, just hollow, as if the house of cards he'd built had finally collapsed under the weight of my refusal to play along. "We can fix this privately," he said, softer now. "No need to drag outsiders into this." You already did, I answered. That's why we're here. HR spoke up, voice low but firm. We'll need to investigate these claims formally. I nodded. Thank you. I've already waited long enough for formal. I gathered my things. As I stood, the silver plate peeked out of my bag, the same one that once sat beneath the cake Tamsin smashed. A witness, a reminder, a silent anchor. Out in the parking lot, the wind cut sharp, but I didn't button my coat. I let it hit me full force. There was no reason to brace myself anymore. For the first time, I didn't flinch. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was from Leland. The state attorney's office has agreed to review your evidence. This could open a case. I stopped walking, not from fear, not from shock, but to let the moment settle, to give it the respect it deserved. Funny, I thought. It took losing everything for them to finally see me. The moment I closed the apartment door behind me that evening, I felt it, the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, charged. Portland rain drummed steadily on the windows, but inside, everything felt too still. I dropped my keys onto the counter, placed the silver plate beside them, and opened my laptop. The glow lit up the room just enough to outline the cluttered papers still on the table. My email was quiet. No new messages, no more statements. Just the hush before something shifts. Then came the knocking, not frantic, not polite, just deliberate, heavy, familiar. I didn't move at first. My eyes flicked to the clock. 11:42 p.m. Another round, louder this time. Then a voice, low, controlled, too steady to be calm. You made a mistake, Coraline. Open up. My father. I stood in the kitchen, hand gripping the counter's edge, body tense but refusing to tremble. It wasn't his voice that unsettled me. It was the years behind it. The echoes of all the things he said without raising it. The way power could sound like patience when it came from him. I picked up my phone, pressed record, and held it close. More knocking. A pause. You think you're winning something here? You think you're better than us now? I didn't answer, didn't move. Finally, footsteps, then silence. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My phone vibrated in my hand. 20 missed calls from Tamsin. Then a text popped up. You're not family anymore, but you'll regret crossing me. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed one word. Recorded. A few seconds passed before I heard it, shouting in the hallway. Tamsin's voice now joined with his, sharp and frantic. Accusations bouncing off plaster, footsteps retreating, doors slamming. Then, finally quiet again. I double-checked every lock on my doors, pulled down every blind, then sat on the couch, elbows on knees, forehead resting in my palms. A memory crept in. Not invited, just always nearby. I was maybe 7. My mother had pulled me aside after another one of his temper flares. Whispered, "He only gets loud when he's scared." I whispered it to myself now. Then they must be terrified. Hours passed. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. So I sat with my laptop open, inbox glowing. One new message. Subject, I'm sorry. From Mom, I stared at it. Hovered my mouse over the line. Clicked. No body text. Just a voicemail attachment. I put in my earbuds and pressed play. Her voice was quiet, trembling but deliberate. Your father made us change the paperwork years ago. I wanted to tell you. He said he'd leave if I did. I can't live like this anymore. I'm sorry. The recording ended. I sat there for a while, playing it back once, twice, again. My breath slowed. The weight shifted inside me, not gone, just changed. I saved the file, renamed it Final Proof. Then the phone rang. It was Leland. We're ready. To file tomorrow, he said. Criminal fraud, retaliation, emotional abuse. This can't be ignored anymore. I didn't speak right away. Then, will they go to prison? Possibly, he said, cautious but honest. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Good, I said, but that's not why I'm doing this. Then why are you? Because I want peace, and peace needs truth. He paused. Then let's give it to you. After we hung up, I stood up slowly and looked around my apartment. It was a mess. Coffee mugs, scattered paper, a blanket half on the floor. But it was my space, and it was time. I cleaned. Not frantically, but intentionally, like I was untangling something, not just wiping it away. I boxed up photos of us together, birthday cards that once felt sincere, the watch my dad gave me at graduation, the framed note from Tamsin I used to keep on my fridge. Proud of you, baby sis. I packed them all, but I kept one thing out: the silver plate. It wasn't about the cake anymore. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about surviving it. I wiped it clean, placed it in the center of my table. Its surface reflected my face, older than I remembered, but steady. They called me a dog, I murmured aloud to no one, but I'm the only one who learned how to survive. I stood in the center of my living room, rain still dancing against the windows, the sky beginning to lighten at the edges. For once, I didn't dread the sunrise. I waited for it. By the time the knock came at 7:03 a.m., I was already dressed, coffee brewing, folders laid out on the dining table. The silver plate sat right beside them, quiet, polished, ready. I opened the door without hesitation. 2 detectives stood there, one older, coat damp at the shoulders from the early morning mist, the other younger, tablet in hand, eyes scanning the hallway behind me before nodding. "Ms. Haller?" the older one asked. "Yes," I replied, stepping aside. "You're here about the fraud case?" He raised an eyebrow. "Yes, ma'am. We received formal documentation from Attorney Cooper last night. We'd like to ask you a few questions." I motioned to the table. "Everything you'll need is right here. I've been preparing for this longer than you know." They stepped in, careful, methodical. The younger detective took photos of the document folders, noting the labels, each one neatly marked with names, dates, and categories. Forged accounts, workplace retaliation, harassment, medical documents, even bank statements. Tamsin thought I'd never find again. "Did you record last night's visit?" the older one asked casually, eyeing my phone nearby. "Yes, and the voicemails, and the texts. You'll find them all backed up on the drive." The silver plate caught the sunlight streaming through the window, throwing a soft reflection on the table. For a moment, none of us said anything, but it felt like a moment of respect. Half an hour later, I sat in the back seat of their unmarked car as we made our way through downtown Portland. The rain had passed, but the streets still glistened like glass. A new kind of light covered everything. Cold, yes, but fresh. They asked questions as we drove, direct, respectful. I didn't stutter, I didn't fumble. I told them about the signatures I never wrote, the emails sent under my name, the financial traps carefully orchestrated with my information. I spoke about the night my birthday cake hit the floor and how it was never about cake. It was about conditioning. The older detective glanced in the rearview mirror. "You sound like someone who's done this before." "I haven't," I replied, "but I've spent most of my life cleaning up after people who didn't think I'd ever speak up." He nodded, then scribbled something into his notepad. When we arrived at the state attorney's office, the tone shifted. No more quiet car rides, no more slow questions, just a building pulsing with consequences. Tamsin was already there, standing beside our father in the waiting area, dressed in a blazer too sharp for the hour. Her arms were crossed, lips tight, face a porcelain mask. Dad looked like he hadn't slept, still in the same coat from last night, collar wrinkled, eyes sunken. When they saw me walk in with the detectives, something shifted in the room. Not loudly, but definitively. Inside the conference room, the state attorney greeted us with a file already open. My documents, my evidence, my voice. Tamsin didn't wait. "This is absurd," she hissed. "You think anyone's going to take this seriously? She's been obsessed with revenge for years. She's mentally unstable." I didn't even turn to her. I looked at the attorney instead. "May I?" He nodded. I reached into my bag and slid the flash drive across the table. "Everything you need is on there. Metadata, IP traces, audio recordings, even one email where she said I was too scared to ever fight back." The screen behind the attorney flickered on. One of the emails lit up the wall. It was hers, Tamsin's. "She'll never push. She's weak," it read. "Dad and I will clean it up if she finds out." She froze. Her jaw clenched. "You've been planning this, setting us up," she snapped. I looked at her finally. "No, you wrote the story. I just stopped pretending I was okay with the ending." Dad finally broke. He slammed his palm against the table. "Enough of this! She's our daughter. She's trying to ruin everything we built." The attorney remained calm. "We've reviewed the claims. There's enough to initiate a formal investigation. Ms. Haller, do you wish to press charges?" I didn't look at my father when I answered. "Yes." He leaned back in his chair like something in him deflated. Like pride was a balloon that finally popped. "We just wanted to protect the family name," he muttered. I met his eyes. "And I just wanted a family." My mother stood quietly by the door. She hadn't been summoned. She wasn't on record, but she came anyway. Tears ran down her face, slow and steady. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. "You can't be sorry for surviving," I said. Tamsin stood abruptly. Her chair scraped the tile. Her heels clacked down the hall until they disappeared into the echo of her own retreat. She didn't look back. I signed the official paperwork, one stroke at a time. Later that evening, back home, I poured a glass of water and took out the slice of cake I bought on my way back from the attorney's office. Lemon, my favorite. Not a candle in sight, just peace. I set the silver plate next to it on the counter. "I won't eat off the floor," I said quietly. "Not anymore." My phone buzzed. Over 100 missed calls, mostly from numbers I recognized, none of which I cared to hear from. I silenced it without looking. Then I opened my laptop and started writing something I hadn't written in years. A letter to myself. Title, "For When I Forget." And the first line was this: "You did not lose your family. You lost their version of you. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken. I felt found." 2 months passed. Spring had arrived quietly in Portland, the kind that doesn't announce itself but sneaks in through open windows and settles in the corners of a room. I lived in a new place now, smaller, tucked just outside the city, closer to trees than people. There was sunlight in every room and silence that didn't feel like punishment. I was sipping coffee on a calm Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where the quiet is complete, the kind I used to crave and never quite reach. I'd just finished folding laundry, my favorite records spinning low in the background, when my phone rang. The name on the screen froze me mid-step. Mom. I stared at it long enough for it to almost stop ringing, but my thumb moved before I could talk myself out of it. Her voice was soft. "Coraline, your father's in the hospital." I said nothing. She continued. "He had a stroke last night. It's bad." There was a pause, long, quiet, full of everything we never said. Then came the sentence I didn't expect. "He keeps asking for you." I turned my gaze toward the dining table. The silver plate sat there, like it always had, still polished, still watching. My voice didn't shake. "Do you want me to come?" she whispered. "It's not about what I want, but if you came, It might mean something. I'll think about it, I said, barely louder than the hum of the fridge. I hung up. Let the call settle. It wasn't until the coffee in my cup turned cold that I grabbed my coat and keys. Later that afternoon, I stepped through the automatic doors of St. Agnes Medical. The sharp, sterile smell greeted me like an old ghost. I walked past the same linoleum tiles I remembered from when I was 12, and he broke his arm fixing the deck. I had brought him a soda that time, proud to be needed. Funny how long that pride lasted. My mother sat in the waiting room, smaller than I remembered her. Or maybe she was just tired. "He's not the same man anymore," she said as I approached. I didn't sit. That's the problem. He never was. Room 312. I knocked gently before walking in. Not because I needed permission, just habit. He was lying there, thinner, his face sagging slightly on one side. His eyes fluttered open when he heard me. I could see him trying to speak, but the words weren't coming. Not like they used to. Not like when they were sharp, commanding, cruel. I pulled a chair close, sat without touching him. Just being there felt like enough. He moved his fingers weakly, pointing at the small table next to him. I reached into my bag and pulled out the silver plate. Set it down, gently. The metal caught the light and shone across the bed, like a quiet spotlight. "Do you remember this?" I asked. He blinked, nodded. "You laughed when it hit the floor. So did Tamsin. So did Mom." I just stood there, holding the knife, looking at what was left of my birthday. His lips moved again, this time slower, deliberate. "Sorry." It wasn't more than a whisper. Maybe it was just breath. But I heard it. I didn't cry, not because it didn't mean something, but because the version of me that needed that word, she wasn't in the room anymore. "I'm not here because I need an apology," I told him. "I just needed to see you understand what it cost." His eyes drifted shut again. I didn't know if he heard the rest. It didn't matter. Outside, my mother was standing near the vending machine, hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't sipped from. When she saw me, she stood. "Will you come by the house?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head gently. "No, but I'll answer your calls this time." She nodded slowly, and then, like she hadn't meant to, she reached for me. We hugged. It was short, hesitant, but real. On the drive back, the clouds parted. Sunlight poured between the trees lining the highway. For the first time in years, I rolled the windows down and let the wind tangle my hair. That night, I sat at my desk in my small apartment, the one I chose, the one no one else had ever lived in. There was no silverware drawer full of gifts I didn't ask for. No photos taped to the fridge out of guilt. Just me, a warm lamp, and the kind of quiet that didn't ask for anything. I opened my laptop. This time, the letter wasn't to anyone else. It was to me. "You waited for their apology and found your own instead. You searched for peace and became it, and maybe that's enough." I folded it, slid it into the folder marked evidence. Not because it was proof of wrongdoing, but because it was the last thing I ever needed to document. I sealed it shut. Forever. I picked up the silver plate, walked to the balcony, and set it on the edge. The wind moved across its surface, lifting the last of my old reflection into the night. It didn't show me who I used to be anymore, only light.